I froze, mid-bite of a BLT that was, until this very moment, promising to be the highlight of my week. My jaw, which had been happily working on bacon, hung slack. "Well, Carol," I finally managed, my voice a little muffled by the half-masticated sandwich. "Didn't expect a surprise inspection? Or are you moonlighting as a professional rummager these days? Find any HOA violations in that priceless collection of 1980s Pogs yet?" Carol, bless her pointy little head, shrieked. It was a sound I was intimately familiar with, usually deployed when she spotted a blade of grass exceeding the HOA-mandated 2.5-inch height limit. She whirled around, clutching a bent, rusty license plate from a 1978 Pinto, a treasured piece of art I'd haggled for at a flea market. Her face, a roadmap of indignation, flushed a vibrant shade of puce that clashed spectacularly with her lemon-yellow polo shirt. "Michael!" she gasped, one hand flying to her chest in a dramatic gesture that wouldn't have been out of place in a silent movie. You startled me. I was just ensuring compliance." "Compliance with what, Carol? The International Convention of Invasive Neighbors? Because I'm pretty sure you're violating that 1-6 ways to Sunday." I took another, more deliberate bite of my BLT, savoring the crunch of the lettuce. It was important to maintain an air of casual culinary enjoyment when dealing with Carol. It threw her off. This garage," she sputtered, gesturing wildly with the Pinto plate, nearly taking out a shelf of carefully sorted nuts and bolts. "It's an eyesore, a clear fire hazard. And this license plate, is it even registered to a vehicle currently residing on these premises?" "It's from 1978, Carol. It's older than my last good haircut. It's called decor." I paused, a slow grin spreading across my face. "And you, my dear Carol, are trespassing. Again. Which, by the way, is a fantastic addition to the highlight reel." I subtly tapped the side of my phone in my pocket. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, a man whose patience was rivaled only by his hourly rate, was getting a live feed of this entire encounter. We'd had the court-approved camera installed after Carol's last unscheduled walkthrough of my backyard, during which she'd attempted to issue a citation to my garden gnome for excessive merriment. Carol's eyes narrowed. "Highlight reel? What are you blathering about now, Michael?" "Oh, nothing much," I said, feigning innocence. "Just that after your last few visits, I decided to upgrade my security. You know, for insurance purposes. Smile, Carol, you're on camera." I gestured vaguely towards a very visible, dome-shaped camera I'd stuck up as a decoy. The real one, the one streaming directly to Henderson's iPad, was nestled discreetly in the rafters, looking like an unassuming smoke detector. Carol scoffed, a sound like air escaping a punctured beach ball. "Security cameras. Another violation. I'll need to see the permit for that installation, Michael, and the approved model number, as per HOA Bylaw 17, subsection C, paragraph 4. Visual recording devices, exterior or interior facing, must conform to the pre-approved aesthetics and functionality outlined in Appendix J." She actually had the bylaw number memorized. I almost admired her dedication to being a monumental pain in the ass. Almost. "Actually, Carol," I said, pulling out my phone more purposefully, "since you're so keen on rules and regulations, let's involve the experts, shall we?" I dialed 3 familiar numbers. "Yes, police? I'd like to report a break-in. Well, more of a waddle-in if we're being precise. Address is 12 Sunny Meadows Lane. Yes, she's still here. Currently critiquing my taste in vintage motor oil and, I believe, about to cite me for unpermitted oxygen consumption." Carol's puce face went a shade paler, almost a sickly lavender. For a glorious moment, I thought she might actually spontaneously combust from sheer unadulterated outrage. Then her training kicked in. The victim card was deployed with practiced ease. "He's harassing me," she shrieked, just as I heard the distant wail of sirens. "I'm a concerned citizen. I'm upholding the community standards he so flagrantly disregards. This man is a menace." "A menace with a really good lawyer," I muttered under my breath, taking another bite of my sandwich. This was going to be an interesting Saturday. The arrival of Officers Miller and Rodriguez was a study in contrasts. Miller, a man whose face looked like it had personally negotiated peace treaties with every bad decision ever made, sighed the sigh of the eternally burdened. Rodriguez, younger, sharper, had that glint in his eye that said he knew he was walking into a situation that would make for a great story back at the precinct. "Folks, what seems to be the trouble here?" Miller asked, his voice gravelly, like he gargled with actual gravel. Carol launched herself into a monologue worthy of an Oscar nomination. "Officers, thank goodness you've arrived. This man, Michael Johnson, he's a blight on our otherwise pristine community. His garage, it's a den of unregulated creativity. I came to investigate a suspicious odor, probably unpermitted solvents, and he's accosting me." I leaned against my workbench, which was currently home to the beginnings of my masterpiece, a Rube Goldberg machine designed for the sole purpose of watering a single, slightly anemic fern. "Officers," I said calmly, "this is Carol Periwinkle, my neighbor. She has an unfortunate hobby of entering my property uninvited. As for the suspicious odor, I think that might be the cheap air freshener she insists on spraying over the fence into my yard. It smells faintly of regret and cat litter." Rodriguez coughed, a sound suspiciously like a suppressed laugh. "Ma'am," Officer Miller said, his gaze fixed on Carol, "do you have Mr. Johnson's permission to be in his garage?" "It's not about permission, officer," Carol insisted, her voice rising to that familiar shriek. "It's about violations. Look at this contraption." She waved the Pinto license plate dramatically towards my Rube Goldberg machine. "What is that even for? It's probably not up to code." "That, Carol, is a testament to the indomitable human spirit and a protest against creeping suburban homogeneity. Also, it waters Kevin." I pointed to the fern. "And, officers, her unauthorized presence here is precisely why that camera," I gestured to the discreet one in the rafters, "is streaming live to my lawyer, Mr. Henderson, for our upcoming court date regarding her ongoing harassment. The one the judge is already aware of and, I believe, eagerly anticipates updates from." The effect was instantaneous. Carol's jaw, which had been flapping like a loose shingle in a hurricane, snapped shut. Her eyes, wide and suddenly very, very round, darted towards the rafters. Officer Miller and Officer Rodriguez exchanged a long, meaningful look. I think I even saw the corner of Miller's mouth twitch. "Court camera, you say?" Rodriguez asked, his professional mask slipping just a little. "The best kind," I confirmed. "Catches all the action, unedited, unfiltered, pure, unadulterated Carol." My phone buzzed, a text from Henderson. "Spectacular, Michael. Absolutely spectacular. She's gift-wrapping this case for us with a big beige bow." The officers took our statements. Carol, deflated but still muttering about aesthetic harmony and potential structural instabilities, was eventually escorted off my property, but not before Miller gave her a stern warning about trespassing that she seemed to absorb with all the enthusiasm of a cat being told to take a bath. As they left, Rodriguez lingered for a moment. "Mr. Johnson," he said, a grin finally breaking free. "That Rube Goldberg machine, what does the rubber chicken do?" "Ah," I said. "That's the crucial bit. It nudges the bowling ball." "Naturally," he replied, shaking his head as he walked away, chuckling. The dust, both literal and metaphorical, began to settle. I finished my BLT, which, despite the interruption, was still pretty good. The silence in the garage was blissful, broken only by the gentle hum of my mini-fridge. Kevin the Fern looked particularly verdant today, perhaps in celebration. The HOA, predictably, got wind of the incident faster than Carol could find a new bylaw to misinterpret. Gary, the perpetually flustered HOA president, a man whose spine seemed to be made of overcooked spaghetti, called me later that afternoon. "Mike, hi, it's Gary from the HOA. We heard there was a situation this morning. With Carol, again." His voice was tinny and nervous over the phone. "Situation, Gary?" I said, examining a particularly intricate gear I was planning to incorporate into Kevin's watering system. "Is that what we're calling breaking and entering these days? Because Carol was practically trying on my welding helmet. You guys really need to get a handle on your star enforcer, or at least get her a stronger prescription for whatever she's on." "Yes, well, the board is concerned," Gary stammered. "Carol has a different interpretation of events." "I'm sure she does, Gary. Her interpretations usually involve me being a villain from a James Bond movie and her being the sole defender of decency and property values. Luckily, my interpretation is backed up by about 30 minutes of high-definition video. Tell the board I'll have Henderson send them a copy. Popcorn not included, but highly recommended." The next few days were a delightful blend of quiet workshop time and increasingly frantic communications from the HOA's legal counsel. Henderson was having a field day. Apparently, the footage of Carol rifling through my sentimental crap box, followed by her indignant defense to the police, was, in legal terms, pure gold. My Rube Goldberg machine was coming along nicely. It was, I had to admit, becoming slightly obsessive. The initial plan was simple: a series of levers and pulleys. Now it involved 3 different-sized bowling balls, a vintage cuckoo clock, the aforementioned rubber chicken, sourced from a party store's discount bin, a small garden gnome I'd rescued from Carol's confiscated items pile last spring, and a rather complex system of magnets. All to tip a tiny watering can over Kevin the Fern. It was, in its own way, a monument to my ongoing feud with Carol. Each click, whir, and thunk was a tiny act of rebellion. Carol, meanwhile, was not taking her defeat lying down. Or rather, she was. But then she was getting back up and finding new ways to be annoying. I started getting violation notices for things that were increasingly surreal. Unapproved atmospheric displacement, excessive sighing emanating from property, was a personal favorite. Another cited potential for optical distress due to overly reflective surfaces. Your bald head, Michael, when the sun hits it just so. I framed that one. The real fun began when I needed to get some actual work done on the house, unrelated to my feud. First up was Barry the electrician. I needed a new 240-volt outlet for a welder I'd bought. Barry was a large, no-nonsense man whose biceps had their own zip codes. He looked like he ate nails for breakfast and washed them down with battery acid. He'd just started mapping out the wiring when, as if summoned by the scent of productive activity, Carol appeared. Clipboard in hand, a visor pulled low over her eyes like a poker player trying to hide a bad hand, she marched up my driveway. "Excuse me," she barked, startling Barry, who nearly dropped a heavy-duty drill. "I need to see your license, your insurance, your permit for this electrical meddling. And are those wires up to HOA Code 7.4 subsection B regarding approved amperage for non-essential recreational outbuildings?" Barry, to his credit, didn't even blink. He just turned his head slowly, fixing Carol with a stare that could curdle milk. "Lady," he said, his voice a low rumble, "I'm putting in an outlet, not diffusing a thermonuclear device. You want my star sign and my mother's maiden name too?" I strolled out, sipping a lemonade. "Morning, Carol. Just admiring your dedication to due process. Barry here is fully licensed, insured, and probably capable of wrestling a bear if the need arose. Unlike some people's methods of entry into private property, his are all above board. Carol huffed, her nostrils flaring. I am merely ensuring that all contractors operating within Sunny Meadows adhere to the stringent guidelines set forth by the Homeowners Association to protect residents from substandard workmanship and potential liabilities. She scribbled furiously on her clipboard. I suspected she was drawing angry stick figures. Barry just shook his head and got back to work, muttering something about neighborhood watch on steroids and some people needing a damn hobby. He finished the job in record time, possibly just to escape Carol's aura of concentrated disapproval. As he was packing up, he said, "You got a live one there, buddy. My sister-in-law's on her HOA board. Makes this one look like Mary Poppins." "Tell me about it," I said. "Want to see the video of her trying to inspect my sock drawer?" The next contractor was Dave the duct cleaner, a young earnest guy with an impressive array of bristly brushes and a van that proudly proclaimed, "We get the dust bunnies others fear." My workshop ducts, I figured, could probably use a good defluffing, especially since Carol had once left a note complaining about unidentified airborne particulates, which I suspected was just her way of saying she didn't like the smell of my sandalwood incense. Dave was unloading his equipment when Carol, who must have a dedicated Carol signal that alerts her to any form of commerce occurring on my property, pounced. This time, she was armed with a thick printout, waving it like a battle standard. "Young man," she declared, cornering Dave between his van and a particularly aggressive rose bush. "Are you aware of the Environmental Protection Agency's regulations regarding the dispersal of accumulated dander within a 50-foot radius of designated pollinator-friendly perennial beds, as per Statute 301.7, revised?" Dave, a deer caught in the high beams of pure, unadulterated Karenism, blinked rapidly. I just clean ducts, ma'am. Like dust and stuff." "This whole operation looks highly suspicious," Carol announced to the neighborhood at large, or at least to Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning poodle, who was observing from across the street. "The potential for releasing allergenic microparticles into the shared airspace is significant. I'm documenting this egregious breach of atmospheric integrity." She whipped out her phone and started taking pictures of Dave's van, his hoses, his slightly terrified face. Dave, bless his cotton socks, looked like he was about to cry. He dropped a nozzle, fumbled with his clipboard, and then turned to me with an apologetic grimace. "Mr. Johnson, I don't think I can do this. My insurance, it doesn't cover this level of neighborhood enthusiasm." And just like that, Dave the duct cleaner packed up his bristly brushes and fled, leaving my ducts undefluffed and my amusement levels at an all-time high. Henderson got another 5-minute video for his Carol's Greatest Hits collection. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, was practically giddy. "Michael, she's not just digging her own grave. She's landscaping it with prize-winning roses of self-incrimination and installing a water feature shaped like a giant foot shooting itself." He paused. "Metaphorically speaking, of course, though with Carol, one never knows. She might actually try to install an unpermitted foot-shaped water feature." We discussed strategy. Henderson wanted to send a blistering cease and desist, possibly delivered by a singing telegram dressed as a bylaw. I, however, was rather enjoying the show. "Let her cook, Henderson," I said. "Give her enough rope, and she'll knit a sweater of self-sabotage." Officer Miller, perhaps prompted by a polite but firm inquiry from Henderson, paid Carol another visit. I watched from my living room window, a fresh cup of coffee in hand. Miller stood on Carol's porch for a good 20 minutes. Carol gesticulated. Carol paced. Carol, at one point, appeared to be demonstrating the correct way to prune a rose bush, using an imaginary pair of shears with alarming ferocity. Miller just stood there, his expression unchanging, a monument to stoic suffering. Finally, he left. As he drove past my house, he gave a slow, deliberate shake of his head, and a single, almost imperceptible eye roll. It was the closest I'd ever seen him come to unprofessionalism, and it was beautiful. Carol's campaign of minor harassments continued, but there was a new edge to them, a desperation. She knew, on some level, that the tide was turning. One afternoon, she was documenting a new violation. I was spray painting a section of my Rube Goldberg machine a vibrant, unapologetically non-HOA approved shade of purple when she backed a little too close to my lawn. My sprinklers, on a timer, chose that exact moment to erupt. One jet caught her squarely on the ankle. With a yelp that was pure slapstick, she stumbled, dropping her phone. It skittered across the grass and landed with a gentle clink just inside my open garage door, a good 2 feet onto my property. The look on her face was priceless, a tragic ballet of desire for her phone and fear of trespassing again on camera. She glanced left, she glanced right. She looked up at the sky as if seeking divine intervention. Then, muttering about unsafe lawn conditions and deliberate attempts to create a slip hazard, she made a lightning-fast, crab-like scuttle onto the very edge of my driveway, snatched up her phone, and scurried back to the safety of the sidewalk. The whole thing took maybe 3 seconds. The court camera, bless its high-resolution heart, got a perfect close-up of her face, contorted in an agony of minor law-breaking. Henderson sent me a text simply saying, "Chef's kiss." The day of our settlement conference arrived. It wasn't quite court, but it was close enough. Dr. Evans, the mediator, was a woman with a gaze that could probably see into your soul and bill you for the viewing. Carol was there with her lawyer, a man who looked like he'd lost a fight with a badger and then been dressed by it. Henderson had prepared what he called the Carol Periwinkle Experience, a neatly edited compilation of her finest moments. The garage break-in, her eloquent interactions with Barry the electrician and poor, traumatized Dave the duct cleaner, her expert-level snooping around my bins, kindly provided by a neighbor's doorbell camera, which they'd reluctantly shared after hearing about my troubles. And the grand finale, the great sprinkler phone snatch. Dr. Evans watched the video on a large monitor, her expression unreadable. Carol, beside her lawyer, kept making little huffing noises and occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a lace-trimmed handkerchief, as if she were the one being persecuted. When the lights came up, Dr. Evans steepled her fingers. "Miss Periwinkle," she said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of 1,000 depositions. "The footage clearly shows you opening Mr. Johnson's tool chest in his garage. Could you perhaps enlighten us as to your reasoning for that particular action?" Carol sat up straighter, her chin jutting out. "I had reasonable suspicion, Dr. Evans, a very reasonable suspicion that he was harboring non-regulation spanners and possibly unlicensed Allen keys. It's a slippery slope, you see. Today it's improperly stored tools. Tomorrow it could be unregistered livestock, or worse, a satellite dish not conforming to the approved color palette." Henderson made a small, choking sound, which he expertly disguised as a cough. I focused very hard on a spot on the ceiling, trying not to grin. Carol's lawyer just sighed and seemed to shrink a little further into his ill-fitting suit. The outcome was, to put it mildly, satisfying. Carol was hit with a hefty fine for trespassing. A new, much stricter restraining order was put in place. She wasn't allowed within 50 feet of my property line. This, I later observed with considerable amusement, made tending to her prize-winning azaleas, which bordered our properties, a logistical nightmare for her. Best of all, the mediator strongly suggested she attend several sessions of boundary recognition and respectful neighborly conduct counseling. I would have paid good money to be a fly on the wall for those. The HOA, faced with the undeniable video evidence and the threat of being named in a much larger, more expensive lawsuit, caved completely. They issued a formal, written apology to me, which I framed next to the overly reflective bald-head citation. Carol was stripped of all her committee positions, including her beloved role as chairwoman of the Aesthetic and Horticultural Harmony Subcommittee. Gary, the HOA president, sounded almost relieved when he called to tell me. "Maybe now we can finally approve beige as an acceptable fence color without a 6-hour debate," he'd said wistfully. The crowning glory was the demand from the HOA board that Carol issue a public apology at the next community meeting. Oh, how I wished I could have sold tickets. According to Mrs. Henderson from across the street, who provided a detailed, blow-by-blow account, Carol read her pre-written apology through gritted teeth, her voice trembling with suppressed fury. Apparently, her statement that she was profoundly sorry if anyone misinterpreted her diligent efforts to uphold community standards as anything other than pure, civic-minded altruism did not go over well. The collective eye roll from the assembled homeowners, Mrs. Henderson reported, nearly created a small breeze in the community hall. With Carol effectively defanged and declawed, a strange and wonderful peace descended upon Sunny Meadows Lane. I finished my Rube Goldberg machine. The final piece, the cherry on top, was a small, intricately carved wooden figure that bore a startling resemblance to Carol. When the machine completed its gloriously complicated cycle rubber chicken, bopping the bowling ball, which rolled down a ramp, triggering the cuckoo clock, whose cuckoo bird then nudged the garden gnome, who in turn released a series of magnets that pulled a lever, the tiny wooden Carol would be ceremoniously flicked by a miniature catapult into an equally tiny recycling bin labeled HOA Violations. Kevin the Fern had never been so consistently or so dramatically watered. I threw a workshop warming and tyrant deposition celebration party. Just a few friendly neighbors, Barry the electrician, who presented me with a custom-made sign for my garage door. Warning, workshop monitored by lawyer. Trespassers will be mocked and possibly sued. Carol, this means you. And even Officer Rodriguez, off-duty, who brought a six-pack and an insatiable curiosity about the machine's inner workings. Life returned to a new, blissfully Carol-light normal. One sunny Saturday, months later, I was out front, watering my lawn, manually, just for a change. Across the street, Carol was engaged in a complex and awkward maneuver. She was trying to measure the distance from her petunias to my fence line with a bright yellow tape measure, clearly struggling to respect the 50-foot restraining order. She stretched, she strained, she wobbled. And then, with a tiny, frustrated sigh, she dropped the tape measure. It unspooled with a metallic zing and landed, with exquisite irony, just over the invisible 50-foot line, a good 6 inches onto the edge of what was now undeniably my sovereign territory. She stared at it. The tape measure stared back. It was a standoff of epic suburban proportions. "Need a hand there, Carol?" I called out, my voice cheerful, helpful even. "Oh, wait." I let the sentence hang in the air, a gentle reminder of boundaries, both legal and personal. I smiled, gave Kevin, who I'd brought out for some sun, a little pat on his frond, and went back to my watering. Carol eventually retrieved her tape measure using a long-handled garden claw, her movements stiff with indignation. I heard later she'd taken up competitive bird watching. Apparently, the local pigeons and sparrows were far less litigious than certain DIY enthusiasts, and much less likely to have their every squawk live-streamed to an attorney. And the best part? They didn't have any bylaws about the approved color of birdseed. As for me, I was already sketching out plans for my next project. A fully automated, solar-powered lawn gnome chorus line. I figured Gary and the HOA were ready for a little more unregulated creativity. After all, a little bit of chaos is good for the soul, and great for keeping the neighborhood interesting.